This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, friends, family, and fellow explorers to Awareness Explorers. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Robinson, and I'm with my trusty co-host and friend,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
A great start. Today we're going to be exploring one of my favorite topics, Brian, which I call MDMA, better known as ecstasy, and love training. How we can train ourselves to be more open to love with certain exercises, which I'll guide people through, and through certain experiences with the drug known as MDMA, which most listeners won't know that I got my master's thesis 40 years ago on the therapeutic effects of MDMA on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I've been studying it academically and professionally ever since, and have been using it to help people evolve spiritually, helping couples with their issues, helping people overcome trauma, and there's a lot to explore. But when we first decided to do this topic, Brian, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, it's kind of perfect because I've never tried it and I know very little about it, so I can be the questioning voice of the people who are curious, who aren't experts in it. Even though I have tons of friends during my club going days who used to use ecstasy, but I never tried it. So I don't know that much about it. So I'm eager to hear what you have to tell us.
Well, one thing I want to say is that this drug is currently illegal, although that is likely to change sometime in 2023 or 2024 due to 40 years of clinical trials and people working to make it a drug that can be prescribed by psychiatrists. And the reason they're doing this is that it's been shown that MDMA is by far the most effective treatment for PTSD. And when the US government realized that they could save hundreds of millions of dollars by using MDMA therapy instead of all the other types of therapy to cure PTSD in soldiers, they actually started to support these federally FDA trials, which are now in phase 3 trials. And the trials have been so successful that they will be approving it. You know, of course, there's bureaucratic red tape sometime in the next year or so. And I'm glad about that. In the meantime, me and other researchers and literally hundreds of other people have kind of created an underground network of using MDMA in therapy to help couples, help people with PTSD. And most important for me, which I really enjoy, is helping people open to higher states of consciousness, which I've used both for myself and in helping friends and clients. That being said, what's the first question that you'd like to focus on so I can blab a little bit more?
Well, I'm certainly curious about using it for spiritual awakening, but actually, just to get this out of the way, how does it work? Like, for instance, with PTSD, what is the mechanism? How does this help people?
Well, the mechanism, when you get right down to how anything works, usually if you dive deep enough, it goes down to PFM as the actual mechanism, which of course stands for pure friggin' magic. But on a less woo-woo way of talking about, think of it that MDMA creates a cascade of serotonin and dopamine in the brain, amongst other neurotransmitters, that creates a feeling that mimics a state of pure love, openness, and safety. And when you have a person who maybe has been raped or been beaten, I was beaten as a child a bunch, you have a lot of fear around remembering those things, and those feelings become kind of like undigested, and they work in the background to create all kinds of trauma responses. You know, when somebody's been raped and they might be in a situation where they perceive danger, they get triggered, they have immense amounts of fear, and it can create many problems in their life. During treatments that I do with clients, they are guided into an incredibly safe, open, loving space. And then I have them remember the incident. And think of it like you're taking a highly charged incident and pairing it with a incredibly relaxed, open, loving space. And the two things kind of neutralize each other so that in the future, when they might have been triggered, that trigger is either greatly lessened or even has disappeared because that original trauma has been digested in a way that the nervous system can heal itself. So that's a short description of what I see happening. I also teach people how to enter into this loving state, safe state on their own with the help of both MDMA and with the help of spiritual exercises, so that if they get triggered in the future, they can create that loving, safe space within themselves and therefore kind of dissipate the trigger much more quickly if it even arises at all.
And is it the kind of thing where you need to continue using it, or can you have that experience one or several times and then continue without it?
Yeah, great question. In my initial research 40 years ago, I was able to give MDMA to a lot of clients legally. They made it illegal 2 weeks after my master's thesis came out. We were finding that about 90% of people could be, quote, cured of their PTSD in one session. Now, that session lasts 5 hours. That it was not necessary to even do a second session. John Hopkins, they actually do 2 sessions a lot of the time, and they are getting similar results. But I found that, if it wasn't reduced entirely, at least the effects were so minor that a person could handle any triggering incident rather easily in 90%, about 90% of the cases.
And why did it last 5 hours? Was that just the duration of when the drug was in the bloodstream, or was there a certain protocol that took that long?
That's about how long the trip lasts. And I like to, when strangely enough, I used to do this prior to COVID in my office, but with COVID, I tried to see if it could work over Zoom. And to my surprise, it works even better over Zoom because on Zoom, you're like one-to-one, there's no distractions whatsoever. There's no place to go for a walk or anything like that. So I set aside 5 hours on Zoom, and the drug's effects make it actually easy for people to sit and be in one place for 5 hours. So it lasts about 5 hours. I create that amount of space to do the therapy process, and that's why it's 5 hours. I want to make sure that a person has integrated their insights, they're coming off the drug, everything's good before we end a Zoom call. Now, my protocol is also I do an hour Zoom call maybe a week before they take the medicine to get clear about their intentions, to get clear about any goals that they have for the session, because I work with couples also, and many of the people I work with just want spiritual exploration and insights. What keeps them from higher states of consciousness. So I get clear in that 1 hour Zoom, maybe a week before. We set aside 5 hours for the session. And then about a week after, I set aside an hour to talk about what they learned, integration, and steps to move forward. So it ends up being about a 7 hour time commitment overall. And it's to deal with the legality issue. I don't actually involve myself in it. Either they have access to that medicine, or I give them the address of somebody where they can get that medicine. So there's really, I haven't had any problems with the legality issue. It's a rather easy thing to find, but if people have a hard time, I have a connection that is more than happy to mail stuff to them.
And during the session, the 5 hour one,
Mhm.
do you have certain exercises, or do you ask them questions, or is it just a back and forth, or what does that look like?
Well, different leaders of such journeys have very different processes. And I have a definite bias. I'm trained as a psychotherapist. So I use various therapeutic processes from internal family systems to desensitization to hypnosis to neurolinguistic programming to various questions. I'll talk about some of those processes in a moment. But many practitioners do something which I think is kind of a waste, which is they just tell people to put on a blindfold, listen to music, and if something comes up, let me know about it. So they're more passive. They
Mhm.
don't actually do therapy so much as they just create a safe space. And the medicine's powerful enough that if you create a safe space, sometimes, what good things will happen, even though there's not really therapeutic interventions going on.
Right.
And a lot of people make their living just doing that, creating that safe space and being there in case there's any trouble. I think that can be a good experience, but I like to kind of, when somebody's in this heightened wonderful state of consciousness, let's tinker in there and do any healing work that might be challenging to do. I've helped a lot of couples avoid divorce because in the MDMA state they were able to forgive each other and deal with issues effectively. And you do kind of want to follow the medicine, meaning, I don't force people in a certain direction, but I gently guide people to things like, so what have you been afraid to face that now you feel safe enough to look at?
Ah,
That could be a good intervention.
so in the case of PTSD, that's how you would bring that into it. You would ask them what they're afraid to face in particular. And is
Yeah,
there a certain timing to that you have to sense?
yes, definitely. There's an intuitive timing as to when somebody feels safe enough and open enough and curious enough. But think of it that it's taken away all fear, taken away all judgment, and in such a state of consciousness, it's like the perfect state of consciousness to do therapy. 90% of what I do as a psychotherapist is listen to people's stories and create a safe enough space for them to go more deeply within themselves. And that can take anywhere from an hour to 5 years.
Right.
With a common amount being like 6 months. Well, we just eliminate the 6 months and we can go right in there.
Wow, that sounds good. And is it something that's relatively safe? I mean, how are there side effects? Is there a downside to it that people should be aware of?
Well, anytime you're dealing with something of power, there's potential downsides depending upon how stupidly people use something. A fork is not that dangerous of an incident unless you decide you want to put it into your eye. So, when it comes down to MDMA, maybe of the couple hundred journeys I've led, I have had one person have a pretty unpleasant trip. I've had one person have a challenging side effect for about 3 days, and the other 198 or whatever have not been any problem. One of the things that helps is that certain supplements like magnesium can help to deal with some of the side effects, as well as something called 5-HTP, which is a supplement you can get at any health food store. So I instruct people to take those supplements either the day of or the day after their excursion. And the side effects tend to be very, very minor, like a tight jaw.
Right. And I assume that you don't recommend that people use it on their own, that they only use it in this guided session with a trained facilitator.
Well, that's certainly the best. With any psychedelic, or MDMA is not psychedelic really because there's no hallucinations, but it's always best to have someone there to create safety. One of the things I do is I make sure I have the phone number of somebody who lives by them, who can be there in a few minutes in case there were ever any trouble. I've never used this, but I always like to err on the side of caution. And just like, if somebody was getting drunk in front of me, I'd want to make sure that their buddy was nearby in case they had a adverse effect to alcohol. MDMA is not dangerous unless you're taking it a lot. Then it can use up certain neurotransmitters and lead to a feeling of depression afterwards if somebody uses it a lot. So there are precautions, and it's important to be aware of doing it in a smart way. When we initially were doing this and thought that this was a wonder drug, I wondered, how are people going to possibly abuse this? It's a state of love and openness and clarity. And I never thought that they would use it as a dance party drug, in raves. But, people usually generally find the lowest common denominator and use it that way. I'm sure, I've never been to a rave. I'm sure it'd be fun to take this drug and feel love with everybody. But I think there's better uses for it than that.
Yeah. So this has all been pretty interesting, but let's now dive into the other use of it, which is more germane to this podcast, which is the use of it to foster spiritual awakening or other spiritual experiences. Can you tell us about that? And obviously, you have both firsthand and experience of it on your own and with clients and other people and in your research.
Yeah, this has been really interesting, and I feel like I've been able to take it to a new level, experimenting with different things. A lot of the spiritual literature is that you want to be in a state of clarity and love and compassion and fearlessness. And more than any other drug, I've seen that pure MDMA does create such a state. Just as a quick story, I may have mentioned before, my parents asked me why I spent so much time doing spiritual practice many years ago. And I said, well, I want to be in a certain state of consciousness that I like. And they said, well, can you explain what that's like? And I said, well, I can explain it, but it won't mean anything to you. But there is a drug that kind of mimics that state called MDMA. And they said, well, could we have it? And I was surprised that they said that. But I said, yeah. So I got them some MDMA, and I, told them, take it when you have plenty of time and, in a safe environment. Well, long story short, a year later, I asked them, did you ever take the drug? And they said, yeah, we took it. And I said, well, what happened? And they said, nothing. And I said, really? And they said, yeah, nothing happened. We took it and we waited 10 minutes and nothing happened. And I said, well, what'd you do the rest of the evening? And then their eyes kind of brightened and they said, oh, well, we ended up talking on the couch about how much we love each other and how blessed our lives are and how wonderful everything is. And then we cuddled for like 2 or 3 hours and made love. It ended up being the best evening of our entire 30-year marriage. And I said, when was the last time you did that? Oh, we've never done that before. It was nice that we got over the disappointment that the drug didn't take any effect. But it ended up being such a wonderful evening. And I was laughing hysterically because, of course, that was all due to the drug and they didn't know it. Because, it doesn't so much feel like a drug as it feels like, wow, this is what life should be like, where I'm clear-headed, I'm fearless, I feel safe, and I am totally open. So then the question became, can I use this experience like a training wheel, on a bicycle?
Mhm.
You start, you train, you give people, children training wheels. They learn to ride a bike, and then you take the training wheels off, and hopefully they continue to ride the bike. And I started to see that there were very, very subtle things people did or experienced on MDMA to open up their energy field and their heart. And if I could document those things, then when they were not on the drug, they had the possibility of using their innate way of opening to open anytime.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of these things were invisible to them because nobody was asking them exactly how does it feel differently around your heart? Where do you notice tension? Where do you notice relaxation? How are your thoughts different? Many very precise questions like this that helped me to discover what each individual is doing inside themselves to create this open, fearless, loving state. And of course, I record all these sessions and I send those sessions to the people so that they can write down kind of like the recipe for being in this state of consciousness. I also have them close down their energy field while on this so that they can know how to protect themselves in case they find themselves in an emotionally dangerous situation. Because you want to learn how to open up your heart and you want to know how to like close down within yourself to protect yourself. A hand that is only closed is not very useful. It's a club. A hand that's always open is also not that useful because it can be crushed, or hurt. But because we can open and close our hand at will, we have an incredible instrument. And so I want to record how people open and close on an MDMA session so that after the session, they can do that on their own at will. And yeah, it certainly has worked for me. I mean, one of my goals in life when I took MDMA is I said, I want to be able to get into this exact state of consciousness at will without the drug. And whereas it might have taken me like 20 minutes of meditation to do that before, now I can get there in about roughly a minute.
Yeah, I think that's great. When you and I were talking about this episode, and you told me that, I thought that was great. It took me several years of practice. I feel I can get into it in a matter of seconds, into a state of bliss, joy, ecstasy, love. But it took me it took me a bunch of years before
Yeah.
I could do it instantly. And but how you do? Maybe we can compare notes on how we do it.
Well, one of the things that's interesting is that people have various different ways that are very precise. I actually have a little card here that's laminated with 24 precise little things I can do to move into this state. And they're things that will mean much to me, but almost nothing to anybody else, because that's how precise these recipes are.
Mhm.
And that's why most people don't discover them because they're not subtle enough, or they don't have it's hard to be in the state and then use your rational mind to decipher what exactly it is you're doing. That's why it's very helpful to have someone like me asking you like 20 questions so we can get your precise recipe for opening into love and stillness. But here's some of the things I do. Sink into a melty, warm expansion like a hot tub that goes on forever. Okay. Another description: feel an inner smile in my heart that radiates openly in all directions. Sing the phrase of a certain song that I know that seems to bring this feeling of joy. Imagine expanding molecules throughout my body, vibrating faster and faster. These things are formulas for me. They're not going to work for other people necessarily. Imagine that the air around me is thick, like a loving, vibrating organism. You know, there's very. I have 20 more of these things, but what do you do to expand into this state?
Well, when you asked me last time when we were planning this episode, I thought about it and I sort of looked at what I do, which is multiple steps that you kind of have to practice individually. But once you have each one down individually, you can do them all at the same time instantly. And all of a sudden, an acronym for it occurred to me. I call it WEBE, WEBE, and
Uh-huh.
that stands for wordlessly, effortlessly be everything.
Ah, I like that.
Yeah, and I'll break that down a little bit because wordlessly is asking yourself, what in my present experience can I notice without using words to describe it? Because our body sensations, sounds, they can all be experienced wordlessly. And it is that inner monologue in our head that acts as a filter that filters out actual reality, direct experience, and instead brings our story into our experience so that but we can directly experience what's happening right now wordlessly.
Hmm.
So that's something that you can practice on its own. And when you get good
Right.
at that, effortlessly is the second one. And effortlessly really is not taking any steps to change your experience. You're not trying to make anything happen, and you're not trying to prevent anything from happening, and you're not trying to get rid of anything that is happening. So even if you're in a crummy mood, you don't do any steps to not be in a crummy mood. You totally just notice that mood. You're not
Right.
trying to create an ecstatic state that you've heard someone describe or that you had yesterday. You're totally allowing whatever is happening, including and especially your emotional life, to be exactly as it is without any effort to change anything. So that's
Hmm.
the effortlessly part. The B part is you look inside at what it is that is knowing your experience, which is just pure awareness, the background, the same field, the sounds, your body sensations all appear in that clear mirror like background. And you try to knowingly be that. In other words, you take that on as your identity.
Yeah.
And then once you've done that, you look out at the world from there, from as that pure open field of awareness at everything. And you realize that everything that you can see, know, or be aware of in the entire universe is within that field of awareness that you are, which is why be everything. So that's it in a nutshell. Wordlessly, effortlessly, be everything. And you can practice those all individually. But for me, I could just sort of pop into it in a second, and it's lovely and it's delightful. And but who knows? Maybe if I tried that while on MDA, it might be even more ecstatic and delightful and wonderful.
Right, right. It is the type of thing where you're like practicing a muscle, and the muscle grows stronger and easier. And um, I guess, I said it can take me a minute, though that might be in the long term. Sometimes it takes me only about 3 seconds, especially if I've been practicing it. And when you have peace, love, and joy only 3 seconds away in your life, you're having a different experience of life than everybody around you.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing about that is that you become less concerned about attaining some state. that
Mm-hmm.
you've heard about, some state of enlightenment or awakening or realization or whatever, when you know that seconds away and always available is the the basic state, the default state of joy and happiness, unfiltered by our incessant story of past and future. And when it's
Yeah.
there at the drop of a hat, then you're less worried about trying to attain some future state.
Right, right. You know, I think it's really a breakthrough medicine. You know, I've been leading people on these journeys for now 40 years, and I have been asked and am finally relented to teach my protocol in detail, like how to do this, both for yourself or for other people. So this is, well, in April 2023, April and May, I'm teaching an 8-week course on how to lead these journeys for yourself or other people. There's a lot of information on how to do this if you want to do it right. You know, if you want to really get the best use of it possible. And if people are interested in learning about that, there's a website that explains it all at mdmatraining.net. And people can go there and read about, it's going to be like 8 90-minute Zoom sessions in April and May, and they'll be recorded, of course. And, you know, whether you're a therapist or you just want to help people in general, especially as this becomes legal, which will be sometime very soon, it's going to be a breakthrough in terms of helping people spiritually. You know, I think LSD in the 60s opened up a lot of people. And if people can make really good use of MDMA for training yourself and others to get back to a place of love and safety, overcome PTSD, overcome couples issues, and open up into expanded states of consciousness more quickly, I think it's the best tool out there that I have found. And you know me, I've explored a lot of tools.
Mm-hmm.
But as with any tool, you got to make sure you use it correctly, that there's subtleties to it. There's ways to abuse it if you don't know those things. You know, for example, like people on antidepressants don't get much benefit from MDMA because the two chemicals don't work well together. They kind of cancel each other out. So that's something to know. And there's other precautions physically and such. But as with any method or any powerful medicine, you want to know how to make really good use of it, because the way people use these things tend to be in a way that's not so smart, you know, like raves. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's kind of like using a diamond to clean your toilet. Well, a diamond can clean your toilet, but you know, a toilet cleaner can clean your toilet just as well. And a diamond is more precious than a toilet cleaner. So that's how I look at it. And I'm excited to be teaching this course because there's a lot of information and people want to know about it. They can go to mdmatraining.net, find out
Great,
about that.
great. I have another question about spiritual awakening and MDMA. And let's just, for the sake of argument, define spiritual awakening or realization as the shift in identity from the small self, from the body mind, the individual body mind, to the larger universal awareness or
Mhm.
pure consciousness. And if we defined it as that, as opposed to just a general feeling of love and safety, how is MDA specifically valuable in terms of that?
Well, you know, people are different. And, you know, it's interesting. Your descriptions of how you get into this expanded state sounded totally different than mine, although I can certainly relate to yours. Um, and, you know, we tend to think that everybody should be a Christian or everybody should do this type of meditation. But in reality, everybody is different and unique, and you want to find what works best for you. So, in answer to your question, well, first, say your question again because I lost the thread there somewhere.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not talking about, I'm just saying, what if, let's just for the sake of argument, I mean, I know many people have different definitions of enlightenment or
Hmm.
awakening or spirituality in general, zillions of them. But
Right,
let's just assume that if we take one definition, which is the shift in identity from the small individual body and
right.
mind to the larger universal consciousness, how would is MDMA effective in that kind of shift?
Well, it certainly is for me. I would say it's tends in that way to maybe 60% of the people who take it. The other people are more, you have to follow the medicine. For them, it tends to be more focusing on this obstacle, this PTSD, this trauma, and it takes them into clearing the trauma. I've cleared a lot of my trauma, so I tend to enter into I might call the bigger being, the expanded awareness, which is where I tend to go now. But that's not true for everyone. And for some people, it seems to have almost like an intelligence as to what is the next step that person needs to move forward on their path. That's what I've seen. And it's just mind blowing to see how it works that way and how it almost seems to be like an intelligent uh once you set the intention and the medicine and the guide, it's almost like grace comes down and says, this is your next step. This is what you need to move forward on the path. And for some people, that's working on trauma. For some people, it's just being more self honest. For a lot of people, it's experiencing that expanded state and feeling at home with it, knowing that that's their true nature.
Well, I like when you said that it seems to have a kind of a inner intelligence about what is needed next, because sometimes um, that that trauma and that sense of always being triggered by things is can be an obstacle, and maybe you need to get that part out of the way first and then work on knowing yourself as universal consciousness.
Yeah. I've seen this with couples therapy that I do this with that, a lot of times couples will say, oh, this is the issue, the infidelity or whatever was the issue. And then on the MDMA, it's very clear as what caused the infidelity. And that's a real issue, like it becomes totally obvious. It's not even a search. It's both people are aware, oh, it's, the fact that we don't trust each other or the fact that you hurt me 14 years ago or whatever it is. So sometimes it can be very powerful when people use MDMA as a forgiveness accelerator.
I like
They
that.
don't even know that their heart is blocked because of some perceived wrong. And when they let go of that wrong, or they forgive themselves a lot of the time, it's like an explosion of love or an openness is the result. And it's very moving. I have a lot of options as to what to do in my life career wise. I make less money doing this than doing other things, but it's so moving. It's so sacred that I always make room for people who are sincerely interested because it's like watching miracles happen before your eyes.
Wow, that must be amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious, we often, or practically always, end our episodes with a guided meditation, but I'm so curious as to what kind of a guided meditation do you have in store for us? And are there things that we haven't touched on that you would like to mention before we go into the guided meditation?
Well, one last thing is that it is important in the protocol I use that there is an integration session afterwards because ultimately you want to take your learnings and figure out how to apply them into your life. And that's a really important part of what I call MDMA therapy. And some people don't even do that. So in the training I do, I talk a lot about that. And in the work I do, I also do that. So that's something that I just wanted to reiterate. I think we touched on most of the important things. The only thing I might say is that in the my guided meditation I'm about to do, it kind of mimics, without the MDMA, some of the questions I ask and some of the goals of learning how to open up quickly your energy field to love, and also how to close it down. Because once you have that sense of how to do it, just like opening and closing your hand, you have a superpower, really, for how to navigate relationships, how to navigate self therapy, how to open up into expanded states of consciousness. So I think people will find that useful. And once again, if people want to know more about the training I'm leading for learning how to do all this in detail, they can go to mdmatraining.net. But if people are ready for a meditation, let's do it. Find a comfortable chair, make yourself cozy, and we will begin. Okay, so begin by making yourself comfortable, closing your eyes, and taking a couple of slow and deep breaths. And as you're breathing, feel the middle of your chest area. If you want, you can even put a hand over the middle of your chest. Whatever works for you. As you focus on this part of your body, I want you to think of some person or pet or child that you care deeply about. Remember special times with this being, times where you felt particularly connected and close to them. Feel how lucky it is to have this being in your life, how grateful you are. If you want, you can imagine hugging or holding them or telling them how much you appreciate them. Now think of one other being who you feel close to. A pet, a person, or child. And remember special times with this being. Feel your loving care radiating out to them and gratitude for your connection. Now I'd like you to notice what feels different in your body as you have an open heart. Do you feel energy radiating from your heart? Does it feel softer or more relaxed in your chest area or some other part of your body? Is there anything you could do now to open up even more to this feeling of safety and love? Were you successful at opening more? If so, what exactly did you do to open more fully to love? Be aware of any subtle shifts in your body or mind that helps you to feel more loving and expansive. Now I want you to think of someone who really bothers you. Could be a former lover or politician or anyone from your past, someone who annoys you or hurt you in the past. As you think about this person and perhaps an incident of how they bother you, notice any subtle changes in your body. What happens? Do you energetically close or tighten certain parts of your body? What did or do you focus on to close down? Sometimes it can be a good idea to protect yourself from people who are trying to overwhelm you or hurt you in some way. So it can be a good idea to know how to close down consciously. But now, as you did before, see if you can open up again to the safe, open, and loving place within yourself. Take a moment to do that as best you can. What did you do to open up? Did you focus on a person or an energy or a place in your body? How exactly did you or do you open up to a softer, more loving place inside yourself? As best you can, keep expanding until you even feel safe and open as you think about the person who annoys you or hurt you. See that person as doing the very best they know how and feel your compassion. Keeping this open-hearted place within yourself, very, very slowly come back to feeling your chair, and with an open heart and compassionate mind, very slowly begin to open your eyes. Welcome back.
Thank you. I loved that. That was wonderful. A couple of observations. It really highlighted the sense that we have kind of a valve that we can open and close at will. And we don't realize when someone is behaving in a way we disapprove of or don't like that we're closing it down. But
Mm-hmm.
with practice, we can open it at will. And the other observation was, having done the beginning of the exercise, I had a little bit of a tough time sensing the normal closing that I have when thinking about certain people who have annoyed me in the past. It was
Yeah.
like I had to kind of work on closing down when thinking about them. Although one person I pretty much, who's more of a public figure, I pretty much succeeded with, but still.
Thank God for him.
But anyway, a great exercise. I really enjoyed it, and it teaches the skill that we can actually easily employ moment to moment.
Yeah. And, hopefully a lot of people will make use of this medicine. It's gaining, new popularity. As I said, it will be completely legal sometime soon. In the meantime, I'm hoping that a lot of people learn how to use it responsibly for themselves and other people. And it can be a real breakthrough technology, so to speak, for helping people learn the subtleties of how to turn that internal love valve on and off.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I'm still on the fence for me as to whether it's something that I would
Mhm.
try or not. But I really appreciate going into detail and learning about it from all the different angles that we discussed today. So I'm very grateful to you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate your questions, Brian. And if people want to ask me specific questions, they can email me through awarenessexplorers.com or my personal email address, iamjonr@aol.com, or they can learn more at mdmatraining.net.
Great.
Um, and it's important that people do know how to make use of this because it is a powerful medicine, and it's important that people be aware of the subtleties of how to make use of it in a safe and effective way.
Thank you. Great.
And always new information here. Thank you to our Patreon supporters who are always great, make these broadcasts possible. Learn more at patreon.com/awareness explorers. We enjoy the personal emails from you and the extra stuff, sending you stuff about everything from the Sedona method to little essays Brian and I do, and little outtakes that we give from our interviews with other folks. And any last words before we sign off?
No, I think this was a very entertaining and informative conversation. And I'm just grateful to all of you folks out there for listening and for your support, and have fun.
And keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.